Hi everyone, thank you for joining us again. This is the third series or third iteration of our webinars in the Essential 8 series that we're running. I'm joined today by Filipe again, who is, as mentioned previously, a security consultant with MyEmpire Group, who has spent a lot of time doing a lot of Essential 8 assessments, audits and implementations. And we're also joined today by Vijay Chaudhari from Saviynt, who has kindly given us his time to join the conversation, because today's topic is around multi-factor authentication and restricting of admin privileges. So we're talking very much around that identity and access management, where Vijay is a specialist. So as an intro, Vijay, welcome. Vijay is an identity and governance subject matter expert for APAC at Saviynt, as I mentioned, and works as a technical evangelist and strategist with partners and customers to help them derive business value from technical capabilities. So in his 20 years in the identity and access governance industry, that's a long time, Vijay, we'll touch on that in a minute. He has been part of many successful customer engagements in ANZ and the broader APAC market. And past 20 years have been spent in product organisations in the IAM space. So Vijay, welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm going to jump straight across and get you to do, I haven't done the Saviynt intro, but for those that don't know Saviynt or aren't aware too much of what Saviynt does, maybe if you can give us a quick elevator pitch.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Philip, for having me here on this panel today. Really appreciate your efforts to actually get the message around Essential 8 clarified for our customers as well as our fellow cybersecurity personnel in the industry. So yeah, thank you once again for that, and thanks for everyone to listen into this session. So just a very quick thing on Saviynt. Think of Saviynt as an organization that helps companies to secure and manage digital identities. So in very simple terms, we kind of make sure that the right people, whether they are employees, contractors, B2B partners, non-human identities within an organization. So we make sure whether these right identities have right accesses to the right systems and data and nothing more. So in doing so, we go through the process of automating user accesses, prevent risky accesses, protect privileged accounts for an organization, simplify compliance generally, and more importantly, we provide that complete posture management from an identity security perspective for an organization. So think of Saviynt as a in simple words, a digital identity traffic controller for an organization that allows right identities to get access to the right reasons at the right time.
Yeah, this is a complex area, I must admit, and I'm conscious that we've got 30 minutes. We could talk about this for about 3 hours. In a previous life, I went through this with a large organisation I was involved with, where we had the audits done and we're looking at identity governance and privileged access, IDAM. I'm sure you could probably unpack this for hours if prompted.
Would love to. People will get bored here, but it's hard to stop it.
Yeah. So the background to these webinars is, and the starting point here was we're seeing a lot of consistency in findings. So we're doing a lot of audits around Essential 8. We're seeing some consistency in terms of interpretation, misinterpretation of requirements to meet the different maturity levels. And we're bundling them together. And Phil, I might jump to you first just to talk to these two, because previously we've done the patching and we also last time we did macros and user application hardening. Today we're talking multi-factor authentication and restricting admin privileges. So maybe just a quick explanation for those listening around what the controls are, what they're trying to achieve, the connection between them.
Sure, no worries. So I'll start off with the MFA, multi-factor authentication. So in essence, it's a security mechanism which requires users to prove their identity, as Vijay mentioned earlier. Once they've proved their identity by a form of, I guess, multiple authentication methods, whether it be, I don't know, smartphone or hardware token, password or PIN, So there's multiple levels that they can go through to prove who they are. Once that's done, then they'll be granted access to either application or a system or an account. So that's MFA in a nutshell, a very quick high level focus on how that works. And it's actually MFA and restricted admin privileges actually go very well together because they complement each other. So I'll move on to the next control. So just give a bit of a high level overview of it there. So yeah, so I guess the key purpose for restricting admin privileges would be to minimize risky activities on, I guess, privileged accounts. And when I say that, it would be usually what we would like to do there in this control is reduce the attack surface of privileged accounts and accounts with privileged elevations within environments. And this will help minimize the risk to an organization just by reducing that attack surface. Ways that we do that would be these days would be least privilege access to systems, role-based access controls, strong controls in place, and more recently just-in-time access to privilege accounts and roles within environments. So you can see there how they work hand in hand.
Vijay, what are you guys seeing at Saviynt with admin proofs? With restriction to admin privileges, themes, challenges. What's the biggest issue you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issue that we see from a restricted privilege perspective is that organizations do not have what I would say one of the most common mistakes that I see that have been made is essentially that least privileged access model is not really very easily implemented. Typically, people do not have just-in-time access model defined. So organizations say that if there is a privileged user within an organization, typically you give standing access to those users. So the issues that we see are that these become really vulnerable as identities or as accesses that can become in today's world the high value targets, as Phil just mentioned, right? So you're trying to reduce that attack surface. And in order to do that, you have to focus on providing least privilege access. And that is one of the biggest issues we've seen from our discussions with clients, that majority of the accesses are standing privileges that have been assigned. The other thing is, with digital transformation journeys that organizations are, it is very hard for them to have complete visibility and control on any of the applications or workloads that are running in cloud platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure Cloud. So getting visibility and control of what's happening out there in these cloud infrastructure platforms is very hard, and it's that ephemeral access challenge with cloud infrastructure is something that becomes a big challenge to manage when it comes to restricting privileged accesses within those applications or cloud infrastructures, if that makes sense.
So is it that challenge is visibility? If I sort of roll that up, is it's visibility and knowing what you've got, or is it more around being able to identify or unpack what those roles are and being able to?
So it's twofold,
is it
right?
the whole identity governance piece, or?
Yeah, so it's twofold. It's twofold. So why we talk about visibility first is because if you can't see something, if you don't know what's out there, you cannot put control on it. And um, not able to see what are these privileged accesses that are available is becomes a really big challenge then, or organizations then have to put controls for something that they don't know. And then that's where visibility piece comes into play. So one of the first things that we typically try and understand from an organization is what assets do you have out there, or what application accesses do you have out there, or what infrastructure accesses you have out there that you need to secure. So thinking about this whole problem from a visibility perspective gives us the ability to then attack it in a better way when you try to mitigate the issue.
Mm. I can add
Makes sense.
something there also, Alex.
Please.
From what I've picked up during the audits, much to what Vijay is saying is process within organizations could be lacking at times. So the onboarding and offboarding of SaaS or different platforms are not consistently followed within an organization, and that's where you get a bit of that scope creep of shadow IT occurring. And if the backend teams don't know what's out there, that's where we run into these sort of issues where you can't put in specific controls in specific platforms if internal teams are not aware of platforms that are being spun up within the environment. So process is what I've picked up also during the E8 audits is a contributing factor to gaps that are identified.
Yeah. And rolling back out of E8 and presentations we've done and from learnings we've had across a lot of clients, visibility is probably the number one issue we see consistently. Regardless of whether you're looking at it from E8 perspective, identity and access management perspective, risk management perspective. I think all roads lead back to that fundamental concept of knowing what you've got and where it is.
Correct.
With the with Essential 8, sorry, Phil, I might throw it back to you again. With the Essential 8, with these two controls, what are the differences in the different maturity levels for both these controls in terms of ML1 through to 3? What are the differences? What do I need to do differently to meet them?
All right. So generally I'll start off with restricting admin privileges, and I'll just talk up the maturity level. So usually starting at maturity level 1 for restricting admin privileges, they kind of focus on ensuring that dedicated privilege accounts are set up within the environment. Say, for example, if you've got Entra ID, that you're not using an account that's licensed with your Office Productivity suite of applications. Ideally, you don't want an admin account to have a mailbox associated with like browsing the internet. You want to reduce that, so it's only used for its intended purposes. So they look for that in ML1. They also look at, I guess, whether organizations are doing user access reviews, like are privileged accounts reviewed on every 45 days? Has it been active? Hasn't it? Can you disable the account? That sort of thing. And then as you move up to maturity level 2, you start looking at more of the automated processes, like, for example, are these privileged accounts that are not in use disabled? If it's proven to be running, I don't know, for 45 days of inactivity, make sure it's disabled. Then you run up, then it slowly builds up to the later or the more advanced ML3 level, where they're looking at things like just-in-time administration to ensure that those controls are in place, where people have to prove that they need elevated rights or roles to perform a specific task. And also at the higher level for admin privileges, they're also looking at, I guess, event logs, like centralized monitoring and response times of a cyber event. So it's more the eyes on glass, how organizations are reacting to certain alerts within the more advanced levels of these controls. And equally for MFA, maturity level 1 starts off with ensuring that your organizations and all your admin accounts have multi-factor authentication enabled within the environment. That's at a basic level. Then you move up to your ML2, where it starts getting a bit more harder, more difficult to implement, where they also ask for, multi-factor authentication for privileged users on systems. So that's more your, privileged user systems, more your admin staff, whether there's MFA accessing those environments, whether that's in place. And that's from my experience, that's where we start to see gaps. A lot of organizations don't have MFA set up on back-end servers and systems, so it's a bit more difficult for those organizations to implement, especially when it's on-prem infrastructure. It becomes a bit more challenging for those guys. And then we move up to the ML3, which again, it follows the same theme where, okay, are these event logs centrally managed, or is there, I guess, eyes on glass if there's like a cyber alert or event for the team to respond? So that's the logical flow that they follow. They start off very basic in their controls, and they slowly, I guess, escalate in complexity to implement.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. Vijay, with the privileged access and the Essential 8, what's the journey that you guys would take, Saviynt would take a client on? And I guess the other question to my mind is, what maturity level are most organisations trying to achieve with this particular control from what you're seeing out there? Because to me, and again, going back to that earlier comment, having been involved with this with a large enterprise at one point, the challenges with establishing really effective identity and access management, privileged access management within an organisation isn't simple, particularly when there's a lot of legacy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I'll answer this in two parts, right? So the first part, as you asked, right, what is the journey that we take with clients? So number one journey step is for the client to understand, or um, many organizations treat admin access as permanent entitlements, which leads to over provisioning, privilege creeps. The attack surface becomes more broader and wider. So what we try and educate our customers on this journey is to look at privileged access with that just-in-time model in mind, and essentially looking at it from an identity lens. Why we talk about it from an identity lens is because it's the type of identities that have access to privileged accounts as well as privileged roles within an organization. So the very first thing you need to understand is who are these user identities that have access to these privileged accounts. What privileged accounts do you have? Apart from the accounts, and it's not just the accounts, because typically what organizations do is to achieve certain maturity levels, they go and focus on standard infrastructure like your operating systems, databases, network devices. Let's go and put a uh, vault that will store all the privileged credentials. It does not justify the level of maturity that they want to achieve, because vaulting is just centralizing the problem. They are not actually reducing the number of privileged accounts. They are actually just centralizing them to one place in the vault. So we try and educate organizations on the journey to understand that privileged account addressing privileged accounts is not just, first of all, focusing on those databases and operating systems and network devices. It goes across applications as well. Because every application has got an admin role, or there are different types of admin roles within that application. So you need to first identify what these application accesses are that are high privileged. So a platform like Saviynt provides that visibility out of the box with just-in-time application access, where we provide the out-of-the-box controls that highlight that if you onboarded an application like Salesforce, these are all your high-risk entitlements in Salesforce. If you onboarded an application like an infrastructure with an operating system like Linux or Unix, then you do not have any shared accounts within that platform. We only have just-in-time access enabled for any privileged access within those applications. So we educate them to get on this journey first. The second part of the question, which was around what level of maturity organizations typically focus on. In the olden days, I thought the intermediate control, or the ML2, was quite a bit of known maturity level that organizations were getting to, where admin accesses, or where there was a process defined behind the admin accesses. So what we have seen in today's requirements is, as organizations go on the digital transformation journeys, they would want to actually go to the advanced control, or the ML3, where they would want to define just-in-time accesses, enforce just-in-time accesses, have multi-factor authentication been integrated with the privileged access management solutions to have both those journeys being addressed appropriately, and more importantly, have approval workflows for any access request and add certifications or reviews of privileged accesses on a regular basis. So organizations today are looking at that ML3 kind of maturity level when it comes to restricted privilege access, along with multi-factor authentication being added within their platform. That's what we are seeing here.
What sort of journey is that for a typical, like a mid-sized organization, from starting with lots of applications, infrastructure, no dedicated platform or process for that? What does that journey in terms of time typically look like for a business?
So that's a great question, and we've got in recent past we've got solid examples of how quickly organizations were able to adopt this journey. Um, Large organizations like LinkedIn have onboarded the Saviynt privileged access management capability and got on this journey by prioritizing the applications they want to focus first off from a privileged access perspective, and that this was done in 6 to 8 weeks time frame for them, for a infrastructure with operating system and databases. Now they're going on the second part of the journey where they are onboarding applications with just-in-time application access being enabled for those applications as part of the future journey. So um, what I'd like to say there is within a um, 10 to 12 week time frame, we have enough examples of customers within our own global deployment where organizations have been able to get on these journeys and get the maturity level that they are looking at. Because typically a platform like Saviynt starts or recommends only just-in-time access to be deployed upfront. So you eventually start with ML3 kind of capabilities upfront with multi-factor authentication deployed. And we're seeing that time frame being reduced from being months to weeks in current examples.
Right, fantastic. So, and Phil, from an audit and gap assessment perspective, I'm curious to understand what's the most common. Are there common misconceptions with these that you're seeing? Is there some common misinterpretation across these two controls with clients in terms of
Yeah,
what they
so
think gets them there, whereas it doesn't meet the requirements?
yeah, it's all what I've noticed, Alex. It's based on the scope. As you know, the Essential 8 is it's very Windows focused. And when we start diving down the path of MFA, for example, as a control, um, we find that a lot of organizations have MFA set up within their Microsoft, I guess, platforms. But as we take deeper looks into like the identity piece, when we start looking at how they've integrated with SaaS-based applications, we start finding some gaps there because most organizations have, quite a few SaaS-based applications, and we start identifying a few gaps in the MFA controller. It's not consistently applied to all their SaaS-based applications, for example, and they tend to just focus on Windows, and they miss a few of the other side of things, which is their SaaS-based applications. That's like an example that I've found a gap. And the same equally applies as Vijay touched earlier on restricted admin privileges. When we conduct these assessments, the internal infrastructure teams are primarily focused on the Windows side of things. And then when we dig deeper to see how the application owners are, if they are conducting those reviews within their applications, you'll quickly find out that internal IT doesn't have, the right visibility into those other platforms that the business might use to conduct, privileged reviews of systems. And at that level, in order to get the right, access controls into different applications to avoid, permissions creep when people move from department to department. Usually what happens is they've been added into, for example, application A, they get transferred to another department or promoted, that their I guess their rights are never revoked from that other application or from a system. So we tend to see that also through these assessments. So I guess misconceptions is that they primarily focus on Windows only, but you got to look at the broader context. Wherever that identity touches, you got to take that to account also.
And just to add to that, not just accounts, to take to that application level as well,
Mm.
because one of the things you always see is, to take an example, right? Salesforce is a commonly used application. There's a Salesforce administrator who manages everything in Salesforce, and CRM and all data from a customer perspective is within Salesforce. A
Mhm.
typical misconception is granting Salesforce administrator access on a standing basis, meaning it's a permanently assigned access to an administrator. Um, that is a big misconception that we are trying to address now by saying you don't need Salesforce administrators on a permanent basis. You should just elevate their accesses just in time when they need it. And Salesforce administrator is just one access. There are many such permissions and high privileged entitlements and elevated roles in applications that always go overlooked. And an application like Saviynt provides what we call as just-in-time application access. I'm reiterating that again, but that is a control that allows us to bring all of these with literally zero implementation time once you've onboarded the application to enable just-in-time application access is a click. And that's what people are really liking about the platform.
It just on that, the thing that keeps coming to mind, Vijay, is cultural shift. Um,
Yep.
how big a challenge is that when we're talking privileged access and asking administrators or people with privileged access, one, to maybe accept they're going to have less privileges, and two, have more process around when and how they elevate their privileges. How much of a roadblock is that to successful execution of these controls?
Well, I would say it's one of the major roadblocks, right? Because in an organization, when you look at the CISO role, they are always being considered as a no man, right? So they're never considered as the yes man for everything, especially when it comes to privileged access within an organization. Um, in today's world, administrators are very, very handy with, we want everything to be done on keyboard. I don't need to touch the mouse when I'm doing my privileged access stuff. Unfortunately, that is not the world anymore. And there are so many attacks that are happening today, which are driving a lot more of these discussions for organizations top down to be addressed. So while they are number one blockers in terms of the user experience, vendors like us have got primary focus as, how can we improve that user experience, make it better so that the life of the privileged administrator is not complex and we do not add additional organizational change for them to address. But to your point, it is one of the biggest blockers that a infosec organization looks at, saying, I've got this server that is sitting next to me. Why am I going around the world and accessing that server? Um, but the controls cannot be defined without having some processes, and it's a part of the journey that we have to take with clients.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is definitely a tricky one, and like anything security related, there's always a cultural shift that needs to occur for successful execution.
Absolutely.
I'm conscious we are very quickly at the at time, but I just want to leave you guys with one question, one very quick question. What's your number one tip for a successful implementation? If you leave one thing on the table for everyone to think about in terms of MFA fill and from administrative privilege management, Vijay, what's the one tip you would leave on the table for successful implementation?
Okay.
Phil?
For MFA, I would go with getting your scope right. So identifying all your, I guess your footprint to ensure that nothing's missed, and consistently applying the, I guess, the controls across all platforms within the environment. I'd say start off in a staged approach, get basic MFA going first before you actually start climbing up the maturity levels. Unless you can get a third-party application, which makes it a lot easier to implement. But with native tooling, I'd say start off slowly, get it consistently applied to all applications, and then take it to the next level and get your processes defined. Yeah.
Right. Vijay?
And from a restricting administration privilege perspective, I would suggest one key tip is start with visibility. Know who has privileged access, where, and why. Use an identity-driven platform to ensure you understand privileged accesses across accounts, applications, and cloud platforms. Make sure that you map out your roles and entitlements appropriately so you know which ones are your operational and which one are historically over provisioned. And the last thing it would be continuously review accesses from a privilege perspective on a periodic basis.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, visibility seems to be a very, very consistent theme across EA. Thanks, Vijay. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Just a reminder that we will be running the next session in 2 weeks' time from now. I believe that will be on backups in terms of the EA controls. And if you do want to listen to this one or the previous 2 webinars, you can go to our website at MyEmpire.group. There is a link there where we've uploaded these sessions for viewing. And of course, any questions, please reach out to Vijay at Saviynt or myself or Phil as a follow-up. But thanks everyone for listening in. Thanks again, Vijay. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Appreciate your time. Thank you.